Once again, welcome to our webcast for today. It's automatically clean your data to identify, onboard, and manage your third parties. I'd like to start this presentation by introducing today's speakers. Our guest speaker today is Alan Samuels, Vice President, Reference Data Solutions at Alacra. Alan is responsible for Alacra's customer, counterparty, and entity reference data solutions. We also have with us today Mark DeLuca, who is the VP of Sales for Hiperos. As a lead here at Hiperos, he continues to help Hiperos establish itself as one of the premier solutions for third-party management. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Mark.
Thanks, Sharon. And with that great build-up, we'll jump into the agenda, which will be very quick. Initially, we'll just give you a single slide on us. We'll talk a little bit about the value proposition, what it is and how it works. Then Alan will take us through a short demonstration so you can actually see it. From there, we'll field questions and answers, and we'll wrap up. As Sharon said, we have everyone on mute, but we do encourage you to submit questions through the chat function on the webcast, and she'll keep track of them. And then when we get to the end, we'll field and answer as many of the questions as we can before we run out of time. So let's move on to the next slide, a little bit about us. So Alacra and Hiperos are sister companies. We're both Opus global companies that are 100% focused on third-party management. Now, for us, third-party management spans customers at one end of the spectrum all the way through to vendors and service providers at the other. So it includes things like agents, affinity relationships, balance sheet affiliates, all of those third parties, distributors, agents, and so on that you all manage. And we have about 20 years of experience in this business of cleansing, deduping, and mapping and managing compliance on these legal entities. So what is the relevance to third-party management? The three questions that all of our customers ask are listed right here. Who are our third parties and their subcontractors? What business are we doing with them and why? What is the nature of our relationship? And then lastly, what are the risks that that relationship brings to the firm and how are they being addressed? Now that sounds fairly simple, but as most of you on the phone know that are practitioners, it's not quite as easy. So with that, I'll pass the baton to Alan to take us through some of the challenges we run into at the front end of this process, getting good data to work with.
Great, and thank you, Mark. I really appreciate that. So let's talk about the challenges of deduping and cleaning up a database. Sharon, can you move it to the next slide, please? Okay, great. Does everyone have the latest slide up there? Okay, sorry, back one slide. I guess I was slightly too far ahead. So let's start off with the challenge. What is so difficult about keeping a set of data clean, up to date, free from duplicates, and populated with relevant contact information? In our experience, there are four main challenges of cleaning and deduping vendor lists. So first of all, there's a lack of unique identifiers. Trying to match together vendors and suppliers from different IT systems and databases can be challenging where there are no unique and consistently applied company-wide identifiers. The second challenge is this lack of consistency. If all your vendors were listed by their formal legal name, connecting the records would be a fairly simple task. Unfortunately, this is rarely the case, as I'm sure many of you recognize. Names are frequently as entered or as submitted by a procurement manager or indeed by the vendor itself. Some records may be recorded using their local names, some with abbreviations, others with old names, former names, aliases. There's also the challenge of regional and language variations. While suppliers in countries using the Latin alphabet are often recording their company names in their native language, French in France, German in Germany, information about Chinese or Greek suppliers may be entered in English, and Russian and Ukrainian vendors may be somewhere in between, written mostly in English, though proper nouns and other non-translatable words will be in the native language. Finally, missing or incorrect vendor information. So the challenge is, how do you communicate with a vendor when your ERP and your accounts payable system have different address information, or perhaps no information at all? Where can you go to gather or validate this information? So if that's the challenge, how can we help? Next slide, please. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Alacra and our capabilities. We have unparalleled entity mapping capabilities. And what I mean by that is we work with and are trusted by hundreds of different data sources, almost 100 different data providers themselves. And as you can see from the diagram, this includes not just data vendors, people who collect and sell you data, but also regulators, exchange, rating agencies. We are globally. And that's not to mention the data sets we receive from our customers. Our challenge is all about confirming whether an entity we find in, for example, a D&B database is the same entity as one in a Thomson Reuters database, or on a regulator site, or in a national registry. So let's take this one step further. Once we solve this issue, the ability to connect together all of these external data sets, now the question is whether that entity in your database, in your accounts payable system, is the same entity in your ERP system or the same entity in the D&B database. Database. Just as importantly, we can tell you that it is not the same entity as Joe's Cars Incorporated that's in your CRM system. That's what we do. We match all of these different legal entities together, whether they're internal or external sources. That's what Alacra has been solely focused on for almost 20 years. Provide you the key to match together all of the entities in your disparate internal systems or indeed spreadsheets. And this service we call Concordance. So how do we actually do this? So truthfully, it's a combination of software algorithm and a research team to manage the process. But what I would emphasize really is it's not just that we have great software or we have great people. We do, but that's not the real differentiator. It's the fact that we've been doing this for 20 years. We have 20 years worth of business rules and experience of encountering all sorts of data issues, and these business rules have been codified and built into our software and into our training process with the team. And this is the important part. We don't just match things together and give you a confidence in the match. We don't say, this is a 95% match, but this is a 57% match. We don't give you match grades, confidence levels, and leave it for you to decide what you're comfortable with matching. We build all of these capabilities, these business rules, these judgments into our process. Otherwise, we're just passing the problem along to you with possibly hundreds or thousands of matches to review without the experience or expertise to make the decisions or to streamline your process. So on the next slide, you'll see an example of a couple of records coming from two internal systems. So perhaps you have an ERP record and an AP record. What Concordance allows us to do is to manage and maintain a clean, complete, and comprehensive database of all your vendors, suppliers, and contractors, all of your third parties. So we can resolve and eliminate duplicates. We can understand that the same entity is in different databases, even though the name is slightly different. We can fix incorrect information. We can clean up inconsistencies. We can identify discrepancies. You'll see various examples where there's inconsistent, missing, or incorrect information, and in some cases, both of them. Both of these entities that are Microsoft, neither of them actually have the formal legal name for the organization. Once we've cleaned up and matched that record, we can then append and enrich it with other identifier and attribute information. So what you'll see in the example here is we've been able to pull in the Moody's ID, help you know which regulator covers it. So the way our process works is there's a number of publicly available data sources, regulators, listed exchanges, etc. All of that information we database and we can provide into this process. For information which is available via proprietary data vendors, such as the DUNS number or the SWIFT code, for those, you would need to have an end license directly with that data vendor. We are not a redistributor or a reseller of third-party content, but we can help you take advantage of any licenses you have to bring together this data to match, dedupe, and to append additional information to your record. And ultimately, all of this allows you to accelerate your onboarding into a third-party management system such as Hiperos. So let's move to the next slide and talk a little bit about how the process actually works. So as I said earlier, Alacra uses a combination of software algorithm and research team, but really underpinned by 20 years of business rules that have been codified into our solution. You provide us with a file of entities, which may come from more, one or more of your internal data silos, again, including spreadsheets. We take this and we put it through our software matching technology. What happens is we identify where there are matches, where we're confident, the system identifies confident matches, and it also identifies where we're confident that this is a unique entity and it does not exist within any of your internal systems or in an external data vendor. For everything else that comes through the system where it's a potential match, we go through the process of resolving that and confirming whether it is indeed a match or whether it's a unique entity. So I want to be very clear here. We resolve all of those entities. We don't leave you with those matches that you need to look at. We don't say, here's 2 potential matches, 5, 7, a dozen. We also don't expect you to tell us or to provide all of the business rules and confidence statistics and tolerance levels. We leverage our experience in doing this to be able to give you a simple end-to-end solution. File comes to us, we clean it up, cross-reference, dedupe it, and provide it back to you. You then have the ability to take these files and integrate it into your existing systems, whether you have a KYC, Know Your Customer process within the financial institution space, or whether it's a Know Your Vendor, Know Your Third-Party system in other industries. So what I wanted to do now is to actually show you, a proxy or a demo of some of the things we're able to do. So Sharon, if you can, perfect. I will now take over the screen. So what I'm showing you is actually something which is on the Alacra publicly available marketing site. So we have this ability, this opportunity for you to use our search engine and to look up entities. And what I'm going to demonstrate to you is kind of the cross-referencing and the publicly available information we have that you can look this up. So I'll retype in the URL. There's a nice little shortcut. It's alacra.com/lookup. Okay. So what you do when you come to this page is you see a search engine. So we are giving you the opportunity to look up our cross-reference map data set of over 5 million entities. So you can start to look something up. So if I type in BERK, it starts to show me all of the entities that begin with the letters BERK, but not just in its name. We also track old names, aliases, etc. I can also show you with some other examples. It's also looking at the unique identifiers. So when I type in 123, I see companies with 123 in its name, or actually, I think this. I also see the tickers which have 123. I see companies which have 123 in their LEI, their legal entity identifier, or their GIN, which is an IRS factor identifier, their FRN or their RSSD, which are all well-known and publicly available unique identifiers which cover a bunch of entities. So you can see with this process, if you may have the name of a company, but you're not sure exactly what the name is, you can look at this ability to look ahead. You also have the ability where you're not sure of the name, but you're absolutely sure what its DUNS number is or what its legal entity identifier is. You can also look them up and onboard them and match them together in that respect as well. Now, what I'm showing you on this publicly available website is the ability to do this for all of the public identifiers. But picture this capability, this kind of like small widget of code within your own system, and you'd be able to, we could configure it. So if you had a DMB license, for example, or an S&P CapIQ license, it could also look up those identifiers and bring those entities into your system and help you identify whether you have a duplicate of an entity or not. So let's go back to the Berkshire Hathaway example. We have a record for Berkshire Hathaway. So we can tell you and we can understand, so Berkshire Hathaway, here's the publicly available information about its address. We can tell you on the right-hand side of the screen that this particular entity is listed, it's rated, it's regulated, and it has a legal entity identifier. We can provide the information that's publicly available on the legal entity identifier, which provides a bunch of information about its address. We have public identifiers. We can show you its ticker, its primary exchange. But here's the really powerful thing I wanted to show you. So this organization, Berkshire Hathaway, not surprisingly, it's a well-known organization, and it sits within many private sources of data. So there's a number of data vendors who cover this, this entity and collect information about it. You'll see the DMB DUNS number. You'll also see that Bloomberg covers it. You'll see that Factiva covers it. You'll see a whole host of different databases. What we're showing you on this page is we know within all of those databases which one is exactly Berkshire Hathaway. So if you have license to one or more of these, we can cross-reference and map and bring back the correct attributes around address or name or other important information to help you manage that entity. We can also use that information, most importantly, to look at a set of data that you provide and say, these two entities are the same. We've seen it before. We've seen how it's named in the DMB database. We see how the regulator names it. We know what its former names are. We know it inside out. And just for completeness, I can show you that we have information about this entity, where it's regulated, the fact that it has credit ratings from all of the major rating agencies, that it has these listed securities, and as well which industry it's in. So what I want to kind of emphasize here, we're talking today about our ability to take a set of data, to cleanse, dedupe, and to cross-reference it. We have stored within our database information on millions of entities. We work with all of the different external sources of data, but we also leverage the publicly available sources of data. So whatever data you have access to, we can bring into the process to help you clean up your data set. So Mark, let me turn it back to you.
Thanks, Alan. That's a really compelling capability. I think that'll resonate with a lot of our studio audience. So I'll tell you folks, the process of managing third parties, which we call 3PM or third-party management for short, be those third parties customers at one end, suppliers at the other, balance sheet affiliates, agents, distributors, affinity relationships, joint ventures. There's a lot of them, and in most of the companies that we go to visit with, the first challenge that they face in terms of automating their process of managing their third parties is getting clean data to start with. So it's not unusual to see a large organization, especially a global organization, to burn a lot of time cleaning up data before they really can begin managing third parties. The other bad practice that we see is that it's quite common for large organizations to have a set of decent third-party data on third parties that they know to be high risk and upon whom they're already managing in some way, shape, or form. And very often that's the starting point for the business process of know your customer, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, performance management, risk scoring, etc. So the challenge with that is you're not capturing all your third parties. And the linchpin to third-party management, if there's one thing we've learned after a couple of decades in this business, that in order to really do this the right way, you have to manage all third parties. So in this paradigm of third-party management, whether you happen to use Hiperos or Alacra or some other system, you've got something that you're doing, even if it's manual, to manage these third parties. Who are they? What risks do they bring to the firm? How do I score that risk? What kind of compliance are we applying against the relationship to ensure that we've got our arms around that risk, and then sort of a rinse and repeat process. So one of the things that we've seen as a byproduct of this third-party management discipline on a subset of the third-party population is that the risk crops up in places with third parties that are not in the scope of your program. So, you know, the example everybody knows about is all of the breaches that happened last year at this time with organizations like those big retailers, where the third party that caused the problem that ended up costing some of these large organizations billions of dollars was not in scope for the third-party management process because they were a little bit left of center. We know of many large oil and gas exploration companies that get regularly hit with FCPA fines and investigations. You know, it's like clockwork every 3 to 5 years, and invariably the third party that turns out to be problematic is one that's not currently managed. So the linchpin here is managing all third parties, and with the availability of the third-party Concordance product for the first time in history, this is really now possible because this product gets wired into all your various internal systems. To put it simply, bad data flows in the top, clean concorded data flows out the bottom, and against that you perform your compliance process around managing third parties. So we think this is really a home run for our audience. And with that, we'll open the floor for questions. Okay, Sharon's displaying the question bank to us. The first question, Alan, do you mind if I forward this one to you? First question is, how long does it take? Can you give us a sense of, to go from a company with, you know, let's say data in some state of readiness to having clean concorded data, how long does that process take?
Sure. So it kind of depends on how many entities you have in your database or in multiple different areas. So I'll give a couple examples. You know, some of the largest projects we've done for some major financial institutions. You know, I'd throw out Citibank as an example. Probably dealing with a little over 1 million entities. To get that project from start to initiation to steady state maintenance is something like a 3 or 4 month project. We've also done projects where the universe of entities has been under 10,000. Those are projects we can get kicked off and into kind of maintenance mode anywhere from kind of 4 to 6 weeks. It does depend on the, I'd say loosely, the quality of the data that an organization has, which quality being a combination of how comprehensive it is, how well fielded the attributes are, etc. But anywhere in between those kind of 2 time frames are kind of the norm for the sort of projects we do.
Terrific. Another question came in, Alan, from a large U.S.-based insurance company. What if it's not a public company? How effective is the concordance process on legal entities that are not public?
The process which I've described today is in no way at all limited to public companies. The data providers which could be leveraged in such a case, large global providers like a DMD, a Bureau van Dijk, a Vention OneSource, all maintain and collect information on private companies. But the challenge would be if you're not dealing with private companies, you are going to if you're not dealing with public companies, you are going to need to leverage some sort of private source of information or multiple ones. The distinction I'm making is just the ability for us to append additional information. We can provide the attributes, address, ultimate parent, phone numbers, etc., for anything that's public. For anything that's not public, we would be leveraging the data from one or many other sources or from your internal sources. But our ability to dedupe a list doesn't need any external data sources at all. We can work on basically name and country and work our way through cleaning up a database.
So that's a compelling aspect to the service, because earlier you mentioned everybody gets concorded. We don't pass back a file with a confidence percent and leave it up to the client. They get back a file with concorded clean entities, and it's either cross-matched to some legal entity file that exists somewhere else, or it's a unique entity to that company and is added. So that's great. Another question that came in, is this a one-time process, or is it something that Alacra does on an ongoing basis?
It's an ongoing basis. This is a maintenance effort. You know, the reality is that there are plenty of changes each day to the information and attributes associated with these files. Again, just talking about the public universe, we track probably a couple of thousand changes every week to the global rated, regulated, and listed universe. Keeping that data set maintained is not an insignificant activity. So the solution we provide is a cleanup and an ongoing maintenance as part of that.
Great, thank you. Next question is from a large financial services firm. How does it work with external vendors? Do we need to have a license to leverage D&B information or the other sources you mentioned?
Yes, 100%. You would need to either contract with and have a license, or provide us the documentation you have an existing license. Part of our kind of onboarding process with a client is that we together verify and validate that you have a license to the data. Now, as I think I touched upon earlier, we're not a reseller or a redistributor. We're not an agent for any of the data vendors. In fact, we really think of ourselves as kind of neutral Switzerland among all of the data vendors. We won't recommend or promote one over the other. That relationship that you have with a data vendor is something that you do directly with them.
Okay. This looks like a follow-on question from the same company. How successful is the process if subscription data is not leveraged, if it's just publicly available data, such as from exchanges, regulators, etc.?
So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by success. So what Alacra does is we stand behind the deduping and the matching to whichever sources we're leveraging. So we say that we find, let's say, 99.95% of all of the matches and the cross-referencing. So that Rosetta Stone table of connecting your entity to this regulated entity to this listed entity, we stand behind. Now, the challenge you'll have if you don't have an external source, or none of the sources that we're using cover that particular entity, is that you won't have any verification or validation of the attributes. So I'm distinguishing between the unique identifier of the company and its match to that data set, and being able to pull in an address line or something like that. So with a more limited data set, or more limited set of external licenses, you'll get great deduping and cross-referencing to all of those sources, but you may still have some gaps, which is where the content providers come in being able to populate those attributes like address, industry, market capitalization, etc.
Great. Thank you. Another question. I'll just read it as it was submitted. Our data is really bad. We have some parts of the company where the data is pretty good quality, other parts in different regions of the world and in different ERP systems where the data is in a poor state, what's the minimum that you need in order for your process to work, the matching process?
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is what you've described is actually kind of more the norm than not. We've built this process and this system, the bare minimum that it can work on, and it can work on successfully, is name and country. And country can be country of operations or country of registration. While additional attributes, say address, city, state, are useful and can be incorporated into the process, the bare minimum that we would require is just to have a name and have a country associated with it. We really can do magic with just that information.
Okay. Another question is parentage available in this, or do you just map the legal entity to get it identified? Can you also identify, as an example, who the parent of that company is, if there is one?
Sure. No, that's a great question. So what I want to, I guess, focus here on is, so what I've described to you is our whole process is about, is this entity the same as this other entity? So our process is laser focused on, are they the same legal entity? So if two entities are part of the same family tree, our first piece of work is say they're not the same entity, they're separate legal entities. Now when it comes to the relationship between and among entities, so family trees, corporate hierarchies, etc., we don't collect or maintain that information. This would be an example of a case where you would leverage family tree, corporate hierarchy from a data vendor that covers that information. So typically that would be a D&B, an S&P, CapIQ, a Bloomberg, etc. So what we do is, because we can take an entity and match it to its DUNS number in the D&B database, you can then have access to who D&B say, well, this is its ultimate parent, this is its immediate parent, this is its national parent, etc. We can cross-reference all the entities to the ultimate parent ID, and then you can connect them back together in the database. The only, I guess, additional comment I'd make, but for the public companies, for rated, regulated, and listed, we do go out and collect the ultimate parent information. So that's definitely a subset of this universe. I'd say typically some of the large financial institutions, some departments, their universe will be rated, regulated, and listed entities. So that's something that we can help with without any external data licenses. But typically at the vendor level, supplier level, or kind of a regional business, typically that kind of family tree and hierarchy would be coming from a proprietary data vendor. But we can also help you, if you have more than one source, we can help kind of cross-reference and map you to both of them, and sometimes take advantage of additional information in one source over another.
Terrific. And I'll just complement what you said, Alan, by pointing out that it's not unusual in many organizations, especially as an example, a large financial services organization, to be doing business with legal entities that are both customers as well as vendors. And going through this concordance process will give you the ability to identify that, in fact, they are the same legal entity. And we see our clients doing things like understanding service providers that we work with, people to whom we pay money for providing service, that also happen to be customers of the firm, and tracking the customer information on that entity, who they work with, and so on, so that when we, as an example, run a sourcing event, we can ensure that we're maintaining the appropriate walls between the different parts of our organization and triaging potentially a bad thing before it happens. Same thing on the KYC side is understanding the fact that you may have, and when I say KYC, I mean know your customer, you may have a multi-dimensional relationship with this third party. They might not just be a customer. And with the regulatory oversight to which some of our clients are subject, knowing that can be helpful in documenting that the right compliance was done when that third party was onboarded and on an ongoing basis. I think that's it for questions, Sharon. Sharon's giving me the, cut off hand at the throat message. I think we're running a little bit over, so I'll thank everybody for their time and pass back to Sharon to close it out for us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and this does conclude our webinar for today. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the contact information shown on the screen, and you can always log into www.hiperos.com and send questions through the Contact Us form on the website. The slides and recorded webcasts will be uploaded to our website at the beginning of next week and available for replay. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thank you. Thank you to our speakers, and everyone have a great day.